The rain hammered against the windshield like tiny bullets, distorting the view of Livingston's darkened streets through a watery blur. Kevin Costner tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his vintage pickup, guiding it carefully along the slick pavement, drawn toward the only sign of warmth on the stormy night, the distant glow of the Grey Wolf Bar. The rustic tavern stood isolated, a relic forgotten by time, its weathered wooden exterior illuminated by flickering lights that barely penetrated the darkness. Stepping out into the biting Montana wind, Kevin hurried toward the bar, pulling up the collar of his worn denim jacket. He was no stranger here. A long day filming had left him craving nothing more than a quiet drink and solitude. Yet even as his boots splashed through cold puddles, a faint, uneasy feeling settled in his chest, a subtle warning that tonight might offer him more than he'd bargained for. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the familiar scent of aged whiskey, smoke, and memories. Kevin's entrance briefly drew curious glances from regulars nursing their drinks. But just as he began to settle into the comforting anonymity, the bar door swung open abruptly. Framed in the doorway stood Jake Crawford, Livingston's notorious bully whose menacing presence promised an evening Kevin wouldn't soon forget. Stay until the end to discover how Kevin faces down intimidation and what unexpected twist awaits, because tonight's outcome will leave you breathless. Don't forget to subscribe and join us for the full story. Kevin pushed open the heavy oak door, and the warmth of the Grey Wolf Bar embraced him immediately, contrasting sharply with the bitter Montana night outside. The familiar, comforting scent of aged oak barrels, whiskey, and lingering cigarette smoke hung thickly in the air. His eyes adjusted to the bar's dim amber lighting, casting a gentle glow over the worn, rustic interior. At the counter, Pete Reynolds, an old bartender whose weary eyes had witnessed countless evenings unfold, nodded slightly at Kevin's arrival. Pete was one of those silent observers, always aware but never intrusive. Kevin appreciated that quiet respect. He settled onto a cracked leather stool, sliding off his damp jacket and letting his muscles relax slightly. Behind him, soft notes drifted from an aged jukebox, its melancholy tune blending seamlessly with the low murmurs of locals sharing stories or nursing drinks. At the far end of the room, a small stage housed a lone singer, a woman with curly dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Her voice was smooth, though tinged with sadness, filling the bar with a haunting, gentle melody. "What'll it be tonight, Kevin?" Pete's gravelly voice broke his contemplation. "Whiskey, neat," Kevin responded, returning a grateful half-smile. Pete silently poured the amber liquid into a worn glass, sliding it smoothly across the wooden counter. Kevin took the drink, savoring its warmth as it moved down his throat, offering temporary relief from the day's physical exhaustion and mental strain. Slowly, Kevin scanned the patrons around him. Faces were partially hidden by shadows and smoke, their conversations hushed and casual. They were people who lived hard lives in Livingston, men and women toughened by endless winters and fleeting summers. Here, everyone had secrets, and no one asked questions. He allowed himself a brief moment of peace, eyes drifting back toward the singer, whose voice now grew softer, wrapping around him like a comforting blanket. But that tranquility was short-lived. The heavy wooden door swung violently open once more, rattling the aged hinges. Cold air rushed in, cutting through the bar's warmth like a knife. Standing in the entrance, silhouetted by storm-driven rain, was Jake Crawford, the town's infamous troublemaker. His imposing frame seemed to fill the doorway entirely, as his dark, menacing eyes surveyed the room with barely concealed aggression. Instantly, the murmurs quieted. The singer hesitated, losing her rhythm momentarily before quickly resuming her song, attempting to mask the discomfort that now filled the space. Kevin instinctively straightened, sensing the tension that now hung thickly in the air. He knew of Jake by reputation, volatile, short-tempered, and known to cause trouble at the slightest provocation. Jake slowly stepped inside, heavy boots echoing on the wooden floorboards, his every move calculated to project dominance. Patrons subtly shifted positions, instinctively distancing themselves from potential trouble. Jake's gaze drifted deliberately through the room before finally settling upon Kevin. Their eyes met, and for a moment a silent confrontation sparked between them, a mutual acknowledgement that neither would back down easily. Jake's lips curled into a faint smirk, arrogance radiating from his posture, as if daring Kevin to react. But Kevin didn't flinch. He returned the gaze evenly, taking a deliberate sip from his whiskey. Jake's smirk faded slightly, replaced briefly by irritation at Kevin's calm defiance. Slowly, Jake moved toward the bar, deliberately choosing a stool just a few seats away from Kevin. His voice boomed louder than necessary as he barked orders at Pete, demanding a beer with an authority that bordered on hostility. Pete complied quietly, eyes briefly flicking toward Kevin in unspoken understanding of the volatile situation. Jake took his drink, turning once again toward Kevin, clearly enjoying the discomfort he caused. Kevin turned back toward the singer, determined to maintain control of his evening. Yet he could feel Jake's eyes burning into him, unrelenting, intrusive, a silent challenge promising trouble before the night was over. The storm outside intensified, raindrops beating heavily against the windows, reflecting Kevin's growing unease. Tonight, the Grey Wolf Bar would offer no sanctuary, only a brewing conflict he knew he'd soon be forced to face. Jake Crawford leaned back against the bar counter, his broad shoulders relaxed but deliberately intimidating. He took slow sips from his beer, his eyes continually shifting toward Kevin with clear provocation. Around him, the patrons' quiet conversations had resumed, though more subdued now, wary of the palpable tension lingering in the air. Kevin remained composed, forcing himself to appear unaffected. Yet inwardly he was on high alert, well aware of Jake's violent reputation. Stories of Crawford's explosive temper had become local legend in Livingston. Once a promising football star, Jake's trajectory spiraled. After a knee injury ended his athletic career prematurely. Now bitterness had settled permanently in his demeanor, manifesting in frequent confrontations that made him both feared and avoided. From the corner of his eye, Kevin saw Pete refill Jake's glass with practiced caution. Pete's expression remained carefully neutral, his hands steady even as his eyes betrayed subtle concern. Pete knew better than anyone what Jake was capable of, having witnessed countless nights disrupted by his aggressive outbursts. "Hey, Hollywood!" Jake's voice suddenly rang out, slicing through the delicate quiet. A mocking edge sharpened his words, designed to embarrass. "Surprised to see a big star like you slumming it down here with us common folks. Lost your way back to Beverly Hills." Kevin paused, the insult hanging thick in the air. The other patrons shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, while others watched keenly, sensing the potential confrontation. Kevin calmly turned toward Jake, offering a measured smile. "Just enjoying a quiet drink, Jake, same as everyone else here." Jake chuckled harshly, setting his beer down with exaggerated force, the glass thumping loudly against the wood. "You think you can just stroll into town and blend in? That we're all supposed to be impressed because you're some big-shot actor? You Hollywood types always act like you own every place you walk into." Kevin kept his voice steady, careful not to escalate the situation. "I'm not here to impress anyone, Jake. I'm just passing through looking for peace like everyone else." Jake narrowed his eyes, clearly irritated by Kevin's refusal to react aggressively. Frustration flickered across his face, quickly replaced by defiance. "You see, that's exactly what bothers me. You walk around acting humble, but you're nothing like us. I've seen your movies. You pretend to be a cowboy or a tough guy, but it's just an act. You don't know the first thing about living here, about real struggle." Kevin studied Jake carefully, sensing there was something deeper beneath this hostility, an anger that wasn't solely directed at him, but rather at something unresolved within Jake himself. However, Kevin knew better than to address that now. Confronting Jake directly about his anger would likely only push him toward violence. Pete stepped forward quietly, intervening subtly. "Jake, why don't we all just relax and let Kevin enjoy his drink? No trouble tonight, all right?" Jake scoffed dismissively, shaking his head at Pete's gentle attempt to diffuse the tension. "Trouble? Nah, Pete. I'm just trying to give Mr. Movie star here a reality check. He thinks he's better than us." Kevin met Jake's hard stare again, his voice calm but firm. "Jake, I don't believe I'm better than anyone, least of all someone I hardly know." Jake's jaw tightened visibly. His eyes darkened as if Kevin's calm response had somehow insulted him more deeply than any angry comeback might have. "Maybe you don't get it, Hollywood," Jake growled, lowering his voice dangerously. "This town doesn't want your kind coming around pretending to understand our problems." Kevin held his ground, sensing this was about to escalate if he didn't carefully navigate it. Around them, the bar had grown silent again, the singer quietly stepping away from the stage, nervously eyeing the exchange. "I'm not pretending anything, Jake," Kevin replied quietly, holding eye contact without challenge. "But whatever it is you're angry about, taking it out on me won't solve it." For a brief moment, Jake seemed almost taken aback by Kevin's sincerity. But the moment vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a renewed hostility. Jake grabbed his beer roughly, draining the rest of it in one swift motion. "We'll see about that," he muttered threateningly. Turning abruptly, he shoved his stool back with a screech, stalking toward the far end of the bar, leaving behind a tense silence that settled uneasily over everyone present. Kevin exhaled slowly, turning back to his whiskey, realizing the night was far from over, and that Jake Crawford's simmering anger was a problem he couldn't simply walk away from. As Jake retreated into the shadows at the far end of the bar, conversations slowly resumed, though quieter, more cautious now. Kevin let out a measured breath, feeling a subtle relief at the temporary reprieve. Still, the unresolved tension lingered, an uneasy undercurrent beneath the comforting hum of muted conversations. Pete leaned forward across the bar, his voice low and reassuring. "Don't let Jake get under your skin, Kevin. He's carrying baggage heavier than most." Kevin nodded silently, sipping his whiskey. He'd seen plenty of anger in his life, enough to recognize when someone was using hostility to mask deeper pain. But tonight, he'd hoped for quiet, not confrontation. Setting down his glass gently, Kevin caught sight of the singer stepping off the stage, heading toward the bar. As she approached, her soft brown eyes met his with warmth, offering an unspoken apology for the disruption earlier. "Sorry if my music got drowned out back there," she said softly, smiling faintly. "Jake has that effect on everyone around here." Kevin returned her smile sincerely, appreciating the kindness. "Your singing was great. Exactly what this place needs." "Thank you," she replied, extending her hand gently. "I'm Ellie, by the way." "Kevin," he said, shaking her hand warmly. Her touch was delicate yet firm, a reflection of quiet resilience beneath her soft-spoken manner. Ellie settled onto a stool next to Kevin, glancing briefly in Jake's direction. "He wasn't always like this, you know," she began quietly, almost reflectively. "Jake used to be someone different, before life knocked him down. Now all he does is make sure everyone else stays down with him." Kevin listened carefully, hearing genuine sadness in her voice. It made him wonder exactly how deeply Jake's bitterness ran, how much hurt fueled his aggression. "Sounds like he lost his way," Kevin observed gently. "Yes, and he's determined not to find it again." Ellie sighed softly, her gaze distant for a moment before refocusing on Kevin. "What brings someone like you here anyway? Livingston isn't exactly glamorous." Kevin chuckled softly, enjoying the warmth of her sincerity. "That's exactly why I'm here. Sometimes the glamour gets exhausting. A place like this keeps me grounded." Ellie smiled knowingly, her eyes understanding. "That's what I thought. People like Jake don't see it, but most of us here do. You don't strike me as someone who wants to be treated differently." Kevin nodded appreciatively, glad someone understood. "All anyone really wants is a bit of peace," he admitted quietly, swirling the remnants of whiskey gently in his glass. "Peace isn't easy to find these days," Ellie replied softly, "especially when people like Jake are around." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of an older man, his eyes bright beneath a faded ball cap. "Mind if I join you two?" he asked, voice warm and friendly, carrying an air of quiet authority despite his age. "Not at all," Kevin replied warmly, intrigued by the newcomer. "I'm Roy," the man introduced himself, shaking Kevin's hand with a strong, reassuring grip. "Figured I'd come introduce myself before Jake decides to cause more trouble. You handled yourself well earlier." Kevin offered a grateful nod. "I'm trying not to give him reasons," Roy chuckled softly, eyes twinkling with quiet humor. Jake doesn't need reasons. He finds them wherever he can. But don't worry, we've got your back if he tries anything. Kevin glanced around, noticing several patrons subtly nodding their acknowledgement, their expressions supportive. It was an unexpected but welcome sign of solidarity from people who hardly knew him. Roy leaned closer, his voice quieter but still firm. You see, Livingston respects authenticity. You showed plenty of it tonight. Jake pretends he's defending the town from outsiders, but he's really fighting something inside himself. Kevin considered this thoughtfully, feeling a deeper connection to Roy's words. Livingston was proving itself more complex than he'd expected, a community toughened by hardship, but strengthened by genuine loyalty. Ellie smiled gently, breaking the contemplative silence. Roy's right. For what it's worth, we're glad you're here. Means a lot, Kevin replied sincerely. Feels good to know I'm not just some outsider. Roy clapped him gently on the shoulder. Trust me, this town might seem tough, but we know real strength when we see it. Jake hasn't figured that out yet. Kevin felt a quiet sense of belonging settle within him, a stark contrast to Jake's accusations. For the first time that night, he began to understand Livingston and himself a little better. But even as warmth filled his chest, Kevin felt the looming shadow of Jake Crawford's unresolved anger at the edges of his awareness, knowing that their confrontation wasn't yet finished. Kevin found himself quietly reflecting on Roy and Ellie's comforting words, the sincerity of their support slowly lifting some of the weight he'd carried since entering the Grey Wolf Bar. Yet, even as he felt the warmth of their acceptance, a persistent unease still gnawed at him. Jake Crawford remained a threat, one that Kevin instinctively understood would not vanish simply because the night wore on. As he glanced around the bar, Kevin could see that Jake was becoming increasingly restless at his corner table. He'd stopped drinking, his gaze fixed darkly on Kevin, occasionally muttering harshly to two equally rough-looking companions seated nearby. Their expressions mirrored Jake's hostility, making Kevin fully aware that the tension was building towards something unavoidable. Pete moved toward Kevin again, gently refilling his glass. The older bartender hesitated briefly, choosing his words with care. "Listen, Kevin," Pete murmured quietly, leaning closer so no one else could overhear. "Jake's trouble, especially when he's been drinking, might be wise to head out early. No shame in avoiding a mess." Kevin appreciated Pete's cautious advice, acknowledging it with a subtle nod. Yet leaving now felt wrong somehow. It would mean surrendering to intimidation, admitting defeat to Jake's bullying. Kevin's pride wasn't about bravado. It was about refusing to be pushed around by someone who thrived on fear. Ellie, noticing the hesitation in Kevin's expression, softly touched his arm. "Kevin, Pete's right. Jake's dangerous when he's riled up. He's looking for a fight, and he'll find one whether you give it to him or not." Kevin's eyes met hers, noting genuine worry behind her steady gaze. Beside her, Roy gave an understanding nod, silently echoing Ellie's concern. "I understand," Kevin said thoughtfully, taking a slow sip of whiskey. "But what message does it send if I leave because someone chooses hostility?" Roy leaned forward slightly, his voice calm yet firm. "It's not cowardice, son. Sometimes walking away takes more courage than standing your ground." Kevin allowed Roy's wisdom to sink in, struggling inwardly with conflicting emotions. A flash of memory surfaced, lessons his father once taught him about strength and integrity. Kevin remembered vividly his father's gentle yet firm voice reminding him, "Strength isn't about fighting every battle, it's knowing which battles matter." Yet Kevin sensed something deeper beneath Jake's aggression, something unresolved and aching for confrontation. Perhaps leaving now would only postpone an inevitable showdown, possibly putting others at risk in the future. He glanced again toward Jake's corner, noticing that Jake was now openly staring, daring him silently to leave. Kevin realized this wasn't just about personal pride or defiance. This was about principles, about showing Jake that intimidation couldn't dictate his actions. Quietly resolved, Kevin finally spoke, voice steady but gentle. "Pete, Ellie, Roy, I appreciate your concern, truly. But if I walk out now, Jake wins, and next time, it'll be someone else. Maybe someone less able to defend themselves. I can't allow that. Ellie studied Kevin carefully, recognizing his quiet strength. You're a good man, Kevin. Just promise us you'll be careful. I promise, Kevin replied sincerely, aware of the responsibility he'd just assumed. No unnecessary heroics, but I won't let him bully anyone else, not tonight. Pete sighed quietly, resigned but understanding. Then you watch yourself. Jake fights dirty, and those boys with him aren't just spectators. Kevin acknowledged Pete's warning silently, appreciating the older man's genuine care. The decision to stay wasn't easy. There was real risk involved. Yet, Kevin felt strangely at peace with his choice. Livingston had welcomed him warmly. He owed it to these people to face Jake with dignity and resolve. Roy clapped Kevin's shoulder approvingly, nodding with quiet pride. We'll be nearby if things escalate. You're not alone tonight, Kevin. Kevin felt gratitude swell in his chest, buoyed by Roy's steadfast support. This wasn't the glamorous Hollywood camaraderie he'd grown accustomed to. This was something more real, deeper and intensely human. Slowly finishing his whiskey, Kevin knew there was no turning back now. He would confront Jake if necessary, not with aggression, but with the same quiet resilience he'd carried throughout his life. Tonight was about choosing battles that mattered, protecting principles of decency and dignity against Jake's unchecked hostility. As Kevin calmly set his empty glass down on the counter, he locked eyes again with Jake Crawford, silently signaling his decision. He would stay, no matter the consequences. Tonight, at the Grey Wolf Bar, Kevin Costner had quietly chosen courage over caution, integrity over retreat, and Livingston would soon witness the outcome. As Kevin settled firmly into his choice, the Grey Wolf Bar seemed to adjust around him, subtly shifting to accommodate the heightened tension. The quiet murmurs grew hushed, nearly indistinct beneath the rhythmic tapping of rain on the windows. Everyone felt it, an invisible line drawn between Kevin and Jake, each occupying opposite ends of the bar. Aware of the stares, Kevin held his ground. He wouldn't seek confrontation, but he refused to avoid it. Leaning slightly against the counter, he exhaled quietly, grounding himself in the present moment. Ellie and Roy had discreetly stepped back, giving him space, though their watchful eyes remained close, offering quiet support from a distance. Moments later, Kevin noticed two men quietly approaching from the far side of the bar. At first glance, they appeared rugged, weathered by the elements and life itself. One was stocky, with a thick grey beard and eyes that spoke of experience. The other was younger, leaner, with an intense gaze that quickly assessed the situation. Kevin, isn't it? The older man asked, extending his rough hand. I'm Ben. This is my son, Tyler. Mind if we join you? Kevin shook Ben's hand, noting a reassuring strength in his grip. Of course, Kevin replied warmly. Glad to meet you both. Ben and Tyler settled comfortably onto nearby stools, their presence subtly shifting the balance of the room. Jake noticed immediately, narrowing his eyes in suspicion, clearly annoyed that Kevin was now joined by local allies. Ben spoke first, his voice deep and measured. We've seen guys like Jake before. Spent my life working ranches, and troublemakers like him come and go. Problem is, they leave scars behind. Livingston's got enough scars already. Tyler nodded thoughtfully, leaning slightly forward. You handled yourself well earlier. Jake's looking for an easy target, but you didn't give him one. That matters here. Kevin absorbed their words carefully, feeling both humbled and strengthened by their support. I just want to avoid unnecessary trouble, but something tells me Jake won't let this rest. He won't, Ben agreed gravely. Jake's pride won't allow him to walk away now, especially with you, a celebrity, involved. But he's got something personal driving him. That's why he's dangerous. Kevin sensed deeper meaning in Ben's words, deciding to inquire gently. Do you know why he's so angry? Tyler exchanged a careful glance with his father, hesitating slightly before speaking. It's complicated. Jake blames folks like you, people successful, famous, for reminding him of his failures. He sees you as the embodiment of everything he couldn't become. Kevin considered this thoughtfully, Realizing his status as an actor made him more than just a convenient target. It made him a painful symbol for Jake's bitterness and regret. Ben spoke again quietly, compassion evident beneath his stern exterior. Doesn't justify his actions, but it explains them. Jake's been drowning for years. Now he's trying to drag everyone else down with him. Kevin nodded slowly, absorbing the profound sadness underlying their words. Jake was trapped in a cycle of resentment, unable to see beyond his anger, fueling hostility toward anyone who seemed to embody success or happiness. "How do you handle someone like that?" Kevin asked sincerely. "Confronting him directly might only make things worse." "You're right," Ben agreed solemnly. "But there's a line we can't let him cross. Tonight you drew that line, not just for yourself, but for everyone in this town." Kevin felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders, yet it was tempered by the unexpected solidarity from Ben, Tyler, Ellie, Roy, and Pete, each silently committed to standing by him against Jake's aggression. A gentle voice broke through their intense conversation. Ellie had quietly rejoined them. "Jake might be strong physically, but he's weak emotionally. He can only fight if he's controlling the narrative. The minute he loses control, he unravels." Kevin listened carefully, realizing Ellie had pinpointed something crucial. Jake needed dominance, needed others to fear him. Without it, his aggression would become ineffective, possibly even self-destructive. Tyler spoke up decisively, determination clear in his eyes. "If Jake confronts you again, we'll be close by. Let him see you're not alone, that Livingston is stronger united. He needs to understand that fear won't control us anymore." Kevin felt deeply moved by Tyler's youthful resolve. The town was rallying around him, recognizing that Jake's actions threatened not just individuals, but their collective dignity. Tonight, Kevin wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was part of something larger, something meaningful. With silent gratitude, Kevin glanced around the bar, seeing quiet determination reflected in each supportive gaze. He'd entered the Grey Wolf seeking solitude, but he'd found something far greater: community, loyalty, and unexpected allies prepared to stand alongside him. Yet even as Kevin found strength in unity, he understood clearly. Jake Crawford's bitterness was far from resolved, and before this night was over, a confrontation would be inevitable. Kevin could only hope that solidarity, compassion, and quiet courage would be enough. As the hours ticked quietly by, Kevin remained at the bar, his new companions subtly forming a protective perimeter around him. Their presence created an atmosphere of silent resistance, a quiet defiance against Jake's intimidating posture. Despite this newfound solidarity, Jake's anger had only deepened, simmering dangerously as he watched from his corner. He was growing restless, frustrated by Kevin's calm refusal to surrender. Kevin felt the tension intensifying. Though outwardly he remained composed, casually engaging Ben, Tyler, Ellie, and Roy in quiet conversations. Each of them kept a cautious eye on Jake's movements, aware that the evening's tranquility was merely a fragile illusion, masking the brewing storm beneath. Finally, Jake stood abruptly, his stool scraping harshly against the wooden floor. The noise echoed, silencing conversations and drawing every eye toward him. Jake glared directly at Kevin, openly hostile. "So now you're trying to win over the whole damn bar, huh, Hollywood? Think they'll protect you from reality?" Kevin turned slowly, calmly meeting Jake's fierce stare. "I'm not looking for protection, Jake. Just trying to enjoy my evening in peace, like everyone else." Jake laughed bitterly, stepping aggressively forward, fists clenched at his sides. "You think you understand this town? Think you understand me?" His voice trembled with barely contained rage. "You represent everything wrong, people who coast through life, taking everything they want without earning it." Pete moved slightly closer, speaking gently yet firmly. "Jake, let's not do this tonight. Kevin isn't your enemy. Let it rest." Jake spun around, his eyes blazing with anger. "Stay out of this, Pete. This isn't your business." Kevin stood slowly, deliberately calm, signaling he wasn't intimidated. "Jake, whatever you're fighting inside yourself, hurting others won't make it disappear." "You don't know the first thing about pain," Jake spat back sharply, stepping closer. His breath reeked of beer and bitterness. "Your movies, your money, They shield you from real suffering. But I lost everything. My career, my dreams, while people like you thrived. Kevin held Jake's glare, compassion blending with firmness in his response. I'm sorry for whatever happened to you, Jake, but projecting that pain onto others isn't going to heal anything. Jake hesitated, momentarily taken aback by Kevin's genuine empathy, yet the pause was fleeting, swiftly replaced by renewed hostility. He moved closer, his voice dropping dangerously low. You think you can just fix things with a few kind words? That you can come into this town and play hero? You're nothing here. Tyler and Ben subtly stepped forward, their presence protective but non-threatening. Jake, Ben cautioned quietly, this isn't the way. Think carefully about what you're doing. Jake turned sharply, snarling in Ben's direction. Don't lecture me, old man. You've done enough sitting back letting this town rot. I'm done pretending to be fine. I'm done letting people walk all over me. Jake's voice grew louder, more erratic. Kevin sensed he was losing control, spiraling towards something violent. Ellie watched nervously, her expression tense with worry. Pete's hand slipped discreetly beneath the counter, quietly grasping something unseen, likely protection if things escalated further. Kevin understood clearly now. Jake wasn't just angry, he was desperate, trapped within his bitterness. Yet this desperation made him unpredictable, increasingly dangerous. Kevin carefully measured his words, aiming to diffuse rather than inflame. Jake, we're not enemies here. No one is trying to hurt you. Please take a moment, think clearly. Jake stared hard into Kevin's eyes, breathing heavily, battling internal chaos visible in his expression. For an instant, vulnerability surfaced, revealing a brief flicker of the real pain beneath his anger. But pride quickly reasserted itself, smothering any softness. You don't get to tell me how to feel, Jake growled, voice shaking. You don't know what it's like to have everything ripped away, to watch your life disappear while the world applauds someone else. Kevin remained steady, absorbing Jake's raw emotions without judgment. You're right, Jake. I don't know your exact pain, but I do know anger isn't the solution. Jake paused again, wavering briefly. Yet just as it seemed Kevin's calm sincerity might penetrate his rage, Jake's face hardened once more, pushing him back toward aggression. Enough talk, he hissed sharply, fists tightening again. You won't fix me with speeches. Kevin braced himself, sensing violence could erupt at any second. The bar fell deathly quiet, the storm outside roaring louder as if mirroring Jake's turmoil. Kevin had hoped compassion might reach Jake, but now he realized words alone wouldn't be enough. Tonight at the Grey Wolf Bar, confrontation had become inevitable, and Kevin knew he'd soon face Jake's anger head-on. But he wouldn't face it alone. The quiet courage of Livingston surrounded him, reminding Kevin he had something worth fighting for: integrity, dignity, and a community he now deeply respected. A tense silence filled the Grey Wolf Bar, heavy with expectation. Jake hesitated just long enough to leave the moment suspended, balancing precariously between confrontation and retreat. Abruptly, he turned away, returning to his table, where his companions watched him warily, uncertainty evident in their eyes. Kevin exhaled slowly, feeling the immediate danger pass, but he knew the reprieve was temporary. Jake had stepped back, but only briefly. The night was far from over. Pete quietly approached Kevin, voice a careful whisper. You all right? Kevin nodded subtly. For now. Pete's expression was sympathetic but grim. Jake won't let this go. You embarrassed him by staying calm, now his pride's wounded. Kevin glanced around, noting how patrons still watched cautiously, alert but quietly supportive. I didn't mean to provoke him. You didn't, Pete assured. Jake's problems run deep. He's a man drowning, and you're the easiest person to blame tonight. Ben leaned closer, his voice quiet yet firm. We should prepare. Jake's impulsive but not foolish. When he returns, he'll come strong. We need to be ready. Roy agreed quietly. Kevin, Jake relies on intimidation. If he confronts you again, keep calm. Don't let him bait you. He's counting on you losing control. Kevin absorbed Roy's advice carefully. Livingston had welcomed him, supported him. He owed them calm, controlled leadership. "I understand," he replied thoughtfully. "I'll hold steady." Ellie stepped forward, her gentle voice adding a calming presence to their conversation. "Jake expects anger or fear. Don't show either. If he can't predict your response, he'll lose confidence." Kevin nodded again, acknowledging the wisdom of her words. Jake thrived on control. Taking it away might disarm him, forcing him to confront his internal struggle instead of externalizing it onto others. "Exactly," Ben affirmed gently, "but we must be cautious. Jake is unpredictable, especially when cornered. His friends might join in if they think he's losing." Tyler added firmly, "My dad and I will watch his friends closely. If things escalate, we'll intervene, but we'd rather it didn't come to violence." Kevin appreciated Tyler's clarity, recognizing the gravity of the situation. "Neither do I," Kevin agreed sincerely. "I'll do everything possible to keep it peaceful." Pete quietly interjected, concern evident. "Peaceful might not be Jake's language tonight. Remember, he sees you as everything he's lost." That's a powerful fuel for aggression. Kevin understood Pete's point. Jake's anger wasn't rational, it was emotional, raw, deeply personal. "I won't underestimate him," Kevin promised carefully, "but I also won't let fear control the outcome." Ellie studied Kevin closely, admiration evident in her quiet gaze. "That's why Jake struggles against you. You're calm, composed, everything he's not. He can't stand that you aren't intimidated." Kevin felt humbled by Ellie's words, aware that his calm wasn't merely an act, it was a deep part of his nature, a quiet strength learned from life's challenges. "I'm just trying to do what's right," he admitted simply. "That's exactly why Livingston respects you," Roy said warmly. "People sense authenticity. Jake might resent it, but everyone else here admires it." Kevin glanced toward Jake's corner, noticing him deep in heated conversation with his friends, plotting something beyond their hearing. Kevin's instincts warned him clearly. The next confrontation wouldn't be verbal. It would demand something deeper, something more profound. Quietly resolved, Kevin turned back toward his newfound friends. "When Jake returns, I'll confront him directly, but peacefully. If he's truly angry with himself, maybe forcing him to face that anger is the only way." Ben nodded thoughtfully. "It won't be easy, but sometimes the hardest conversations are necessary." Kevin felt the weight of responsibility clearly. Livingston trusted him, supported him. He wouldn't betray that trust by succumbing to aggression or fear. Tonight, the Grey Wolf Bar had become more than just a refuge. It had become a testing ground for character, courage, and community. He glanced around, feeling profound gratitude toward each person willing to stand alongside him. Pete's steadfast caution, Ellie's quiet compassion, Roy's gentle wisdom, Ben and Tyler's protective vigilance. Tonight wasn't just about him, it was about confronting something deeper within Jake and, by extension, within the town itself. Kevin braced himself inwardly, sensing the confrontation approaching swiftly. He knew exactly what was at stake: dignity, integrity, community, and he would protect those values fiercely but peacefully. The storm outside intensified, thunder rumbling distantly, a subtle reminder that sometimes the greatest battles weren't fought with fists, but with quiet resolve and unwavering courage. Kevin Costner had chosen his stance. Now he awaited Jake Crawford's inevitable return, knowing it would test them both in ways neither anticipated. The storm continued its relentless rhythm outside, the rain lashing against the windows of the Grey Wolf Bar, echoing the escalating tension within. Kevin waited patiently, knowing that whatever Jake was preparing, it wouldn't be long now. He leaned slightly forward, quietly contemplating the evening's events, aware that the peace they'd found was temporary, fragile. Moments later, Jake abruptly rose from his corner table, his movements sharp and decisive. Kevin watched carefully as Jake signaled his companions to remain seated, silently instructing them to stand down, at least for now. It was a subtle but significant decision, indicating Jake intended to handle this confrontation personally. Jake approached slowly, stopping mere steps away from Kevin. His expression, previously harsh and unyielding, now appeared tired, conflicted beneath the simmering hostility. Outside Hollywood, Jake spoke low, his voice tense yet controlled. Just you and me. Let's settle this without an audience. Pete, Ben, and Roy glanced at Kevin cautiously, silently questioning his willingness to face Jake alone. Kevin offered a subtle nod, signaling trust, both in himself and Jake. All right, Jake, Kevin responded calmly, standing slowly from his stool. Outside. Kevin's companions reluctantly stepped back, trusting his judgment, yet prepared to intervene swiftly if necessary. Ellie's eyes carried quiet concern as Kevin passed her, but she said nothing, understanding his resolve. Stepping outside, the cold rain hit Kevin sharply, immediately soaking through his clothing. Jake stood facing him, drenched, eyes burning fiercely. Yet Kevin sensed something different. Beneath Jake's anger was a raw vulnerability that hadn't been visible before. Jake stared hard at Kevin, rain streaming down his face, blending with unspoken pain. "Why'd you come here, Kevin?" he finally asked, voice rough with suppressed emotion. "Why this bar, this town?" Kevin chose honesty. "I needed something real, away from all the pretenses." Livingston felt authentic. Jake scoffed softly, bitterness still evident. "Authentic? You mean damaged, broken, like me?" Kevin held Jake's gaze steadily. "No, honest, strong, flawed, yes, but still fighting." Jake hesitated, struggling visibly with conflicting emotions. "You don't get it," he finally murmured, voice strained. "People like you always win. People like me always lose. You just remind me how much I've failed." Kevin took a careful step forward, voice gentle but firm. "Jake, you haven't lost yet. Not until you give up on yourself." Jake's jaw tightened, frustration warring openly with deeper sorrow. "You think it's that simple? You think a pep talk fixes years of failure, regret? You think words erase a career ending before it started?" Kevin shook his head slowly, sincerely. "No, but neither does anger or violence. Trust me, Jake, those are roads I've seen too often. They lead nowhere." For a brief moment, Jake seemed genuinely startled, caught off guard by Kevin's quiet candor. "You seen roads like mine?" "More than you think," Kevin replied quietly. "Everyone carries pain. Yours isn't less valid, but you have to face it directly, not through rage." Jake remained silent, the storm intensifying around them, wind whipping fiercely. Yet beneath the harsh conditions, Jake's expression softened slightly, hinting at genuine contemplation. "I don't know any other way," he admitted finally, voice heavy. "Anger's been all I've had." Kevin recognized genuine honesty in Jake's admission. He responded compassionately, voice clear despite the roaring storm. "That's because it's easier to be angry than admit pain, Jake. Anger makes us feel strong, until we realize it's slowly destroying us." Jake took a deep, shuddering breath, clearly grappling internally. "You think it's possible to change after so much bitterness?" Kevin's reply was immediate, firm, compassionate. "Absolutely. Change begins the moment you choose it. But that choice must come from you, not anger, not regret. Just you." Jake stared quietly at Kevin, conflicted but visibly moved by his words. Rain cascaded down both men, washing away hostility, leaving vulnerability exposed between them. "I don't even know how," Jake admitted softly, almost helplessly. "I've spent years blaming others, blaming people like you. How do I move forward from that?" Kevin took another gentle step closer, extending his hand openly through the rain, a gesture of genuine peace. "First step. Accept that blame solves nothing. The second, realize you're not alone. You've still got Livingston. This town hasn't given up on you." Jake hesitated, eyes flicking uncertainly from Kevin's extended hand to his own clenched fists. His anger wavered, visibly weakening. Kevin's quiet sincerity, his calm acceptance, had reached something deeper within Jake, something desperate for healing rather than hostility. Slowly, almost uncertainly, Jake's hand rose, trembling slightly before firmly grasping Kevin's outstretched hand. The gesture wasn't surrender. It was recognition, acceptance of vulnerability. Standing silently together in the storm, hands clasped firmly, both men realized this confrontation had shifted fundamentally, from potential violence to profound honesty. Jake's anger hadn't vanished entirely, but now there was room for something else, hope. Yet even as they stood in the rain's cleansing embrace, Kevin sensed clearly. The night wasn't finished testing them. Something deeper, unexpected, remained hidden, waiting quietly to reveal itself. The rain lashed against the sides of the Grey Wolf Bar, a constant reminder of the storm still brewing outside. Inside, Kevin stood firm, his heart pounding but his expression calm, watching Jake closely. The tension was palpable. Everybody was waiting for the next move. Jake stood across from Kevin, his eyes still burning with frustration. But beneath that anger, Kevin could see something else flickering. It wasn't just rage anymore. Jake was wrestling with something deeper, something painful. Jake's hand clenched into a fist, and for a brief moment, Kevin thought the confrontation would turn violent. But instead, Jake turned away, pacing a few steps before stopping to glare at Kevin. "What the hell do you know about my life, huh? You walk in here with your money and your fame, and now you think you can fix me?" Kevin stood his ground, his voice steady, unshaken. "Jake, I'm not here to fix you, I'm just here to talk," Jake scoffed, his face contorted with disbelief and anger. "Talk? Yeah, right. You think your fancy words are going to make it all go away?" Kevin took a slow step forward, his voice calm but firm. "No, but maybe, just maybe, they'll help you see something else. You've been carrying this anger for so long. It's not you, Jake. It's the pain inside you. It's the part of you that refuses to let go." Jake flinched as though struck, the words cutting through his armor. For the first time that night, the hardness in his eyes wavered. But instead of replying, he turned away and punched the nearby trash can with all his might, sending a deafening clang through the air. The sound echoed in the bar, and for a moment, there was silence. Then Jake collapsed onto a bench, his hands gripping his hair as his body shook. His breath came in ragged gasps, his face hidden behind trembling hands. Kevin took another step forward, this time lowering his voice. "Jake, you don't have to keep carrying this burden. You don't have to keep hurting yourself and everyone around you." Jake's voice cracked as he spoke, the anger finally breaking through to reveal the exhaustion underneath. "I've lost everything, Kevin. Everything I worked for, everything I thought I could be. It's all gone. And now all I have left is this anger. It's all I've got." Kevin's heart went out to him, his own pain rising within him as he remembered the struggles he had faced in his own life. "You haven't lost everything, Jake. You still have a chance. You don't have to let this define you." Jake sat there, silently shaking, caught between the anger that had defined his existence and the possibility of something else, something that Kevin was offering him, something real. For a long moment, Kevin waited, letting the silence settle between them. It was up to Jake now. He had to choose whether to keep holding on to the anger or let it go and embrace something better. After a long pause, Jake spoke, his voice low and filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can let go of it, Kevin. I've been angry for so long, I don't know who I am without it." Kevin knelt in front of him, looking him in the eye. "You're Jake Crawford. You're not just your anger. You're not what you've been through. You're more than that. You just have to start believing it." Jake looked up at him, eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and hope. For the first time, the anger in his eyes began to fade. Slowly, he wiped his face with his hands and his posture softened. "I don't know how to start." Kevin offered a gentle, reassuring smile. "You've already started. You're here facing this, that's the first step." There was a long pause before Jake almost tentatively extended his hand toward Kevin. Maybe I can try. I don't know if I can fix everything, but I'll try." Kevin grasped Jake's hand firmly, feeling the weight of the moment. "That's all anyone can do, Jake. Just try and don't do it alone." As Jake stood up, the two men shared a moment of quiet understanding. The anger, the fight, it hadn't disappeared entirely, but in that small exchange, something had shifted. And perhaps, just perhaps, this was the first step toward healing. The storm outside had started to ease, and as they stood there, Kevin could feel the heavy weight of the past lifting from the air, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start that had been long overdue. As they turned to head back inside, the Grey Wolf Bar felt different. The atmosphere had changed, softened, as though the town itself had taken a collective breath. People had witnessed something raw, something real, and for the first time that night, there was a sense of unity among them, a shared understanding of what had just transpired. The jukebox hummed softly in the background, the melody now soothing, the storm outside now just a memory. Kevin felt the quiet strength of the people around him, a reminder that no one was truly alone, even in their darkest moments. They were all, in their own way, trying to find their way back to something better. And tonight, Kevin had made sure that Jake had taken the first step.